The weight of 100 unspoken words pressed against Lorana's chest as she stood motionless in the grand hall, her green skin illuminated by the cold glow of the hovering chandeliers above. The air was thick with the scent of polished metal and rare incense, mingling with the bitter undertone of disdain that clung to the nobles like an unseen fog. She did not belong here. She never had. And now she was being given away like a meaningless trinket. Her father, Baron Zelthar, stood at the head of the chamber, his presence commanding and suffocating all at once. He was a figure carved from arrogance and power, his dark crimson robes trailing behind him like blood spilled across the marble. His obsidian eyes held no warmth as he turned toward the human standing before him. A man Lorana had never seen before, yet one she somehow sensed would change everything. The room was silent, save for the steady hum of the hovering banners that bore her father's insignia. It was a mark of dominance, a declaration of rule over this sector of the galaxy, and tonight it was being used to seal a deal. One that involved her. The Baron's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "Commander Garon Wolf." His tone was rich with mockery, though his expression remained unreadable. "You have served well. You've won battles thought unwinnable, crushed enemies thought indomitable. You have proven your worth." He took a measured step forward. "And I am a man of my word." Lorana's fingers curled into her palm. "I know what comes next. As promised, I present to you a prize worthy of your victories." He gestured toward her without a glance. "My daughter, Lorana." The weight of every gaze in the room turned to her in unison. A pulse of heat crawled up her spine, but she kept her face neutral, her expression carved from the same cold stone as the pillars around her. She had been trained for this, to be silent, to be still, to accept what was given and taken without resistance. She was not a person in their eyes. She was a symbol, a transaction, a reward. A murmur rippled through the nobles, amusement, curiosity, pity. "A prize," she thought bitterly. "That's all I am." A tall noblewoman in a shimmering gown whispered to her companion, "I had heard rumors he would give her away, but to a human?" A delicate laugh. "What an insult." Another voice, older, rougher. "Not an insult, a test. Let's see how long before he regrets accepting such a useless thing." Lorana's stomach twisted. She had no voice to defend herself, no way to silence them. She felt the Baron's gaze settle on her now, his patience razor thin. He had never looked at her as a father should, not with love, not even with duty, only resentment. To him she was a failure, a firstborn who could never lead, never command, never carry his legacy, a wasted lineage. She did not know what was worse, the hatred in his silence or the fact that she had grown used to it. She wanted to look away, but she knew better. Looking away would be seen as weakness. She was tired of being weak. So she forced herself to lift her chin, her long white hair cascading over her shoulders as she met his gaze, a silent act of defiance. The Baron's smirk deepened. He turned back to the human. "She does not speak. She cannot. But that should not matter. She will obey." A chuckle rippled through the nobles. Lorana's chest tightened. "They think I feel nothing, that my silence means I do not understand their cruelty. They are wrong." And then, for the first time, she really looked at the man standing before her. Commander Garon Wolf. He did not laugh. He did not sneer. He did not even react to the Baron's taunts. He was tall, broad-shouldered, battle-worn, and completely unreadable. A scar ran from his temple to the curve of his jaw, cutting through his tanned skin like a mark of every war he had survived. His dark eyes studied her, not with pity, not with amusement, but with something else entirely. She couldn't name it. He had the posture of a soldier, but there was something controlled about the way he stood, as if he was resisting the urge to move, to speak, to react. Silence stretched between them. The Baron chuckled. No objections, no questions. He gestured lazily toward her. She is yours now. A reward for your loyalty. Take her and be gone from my sight. Lorana's breath stilled, and just like that I am given away. Garen's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. Then, without a word, he stepped forward. She expected him to grab her wrist, to claim her like the transaction she was meant to be. That was what the others would have done. That was what her father wanted, a display of dominance, proof of control. But Garen did none of those things. Instead, he simply held out his hand. A choice, not a demand, not a command. The nobles murmured in confusion. Why is he treating her like a person? Lorana's heart pounded against her ribs. No one had ever let her choose anything. Her father's voice was a warning. She won't refuse, because she never had a choice. Until now. She glanced at Garen's outstretched hand. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, dark and steady, held something unexpected. Understanding. Does he see me? Her fingers trembled at her sides. She could stay in the cold, in the silence, in a life where she would always be nothing. Or she could take his hand and walk into the unknown. Lorana exhaled slowly. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she reached forward and placed her hand in his. A hush fell over the chamber. Garen's fingers closed around hers, not forceful, not possessive, but steady. For the first time in her life, someone did not pull her forward or push her aside. For the first time, she moved on her own. The Baron said nothing. He had already won. She was no longer his burden to bear. Garen turned, leading her toward the exit. The nobles whispered behind them, but Lorana didn't listen. I am leaving. It was not freedom. Not yet. But for the first time in her life, it felt like the beginning of something. And as she stepped through the towering doors, her silent voice whispered the one truth she had never dared believe. Perhaps someone has finally heard me. The journey from the Baron's estate to the waiting ship was silent, broken only by the steady rhythm of boots against polished stone. Lorana walked beside Garen Wolf, her long white hair flowing like liquid silver down her back, her green skin catching the faint glow of the hovering lanterns above. She kept her posture straight, her face unreadable, but inside her thoughts churned. They're still watching, the nobles had whispered as they left. Some with scorn, some with amusement, some with curiosity, but not a single one had expected her to go willingly. Did I go willingly? Her fingers twitched at her sides. She hadn't fought back, she hadn't tried to run, but was that acceptance? Or just exhaustion? She cast a sidelong glance at the human walking ahead of her. He moved with the ease of a man who had spent years in command, his strides purposeful, his expression unreadable. He had taken her hand back in the chamber, not in force but in offering, and now he simply walked, as if sensing she would follow but never demanding it. Strange. Lorana was used to people pushing, dragging, or shoving her where they wanted. She was used to being spoken over, spoken for, or ignored entirely. But Garen Wolf had not tested her silence. He had not tried to fill it with meaningless words. That, more than anything, unsettled her. The landing platform stretched ahead, a vast expanse of steel against the endless sky. Above them, nebulae swirled in deep blues and purples, stars blinking like distant watchful eyes. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of energy fields, stabilizing the ship's docking bay. The vessel itself was sleek and dark, a human-made warship, small, efficient, built for speed rather than comfort. Lorana recognized the design. No ornamentation, no wasted space. This is not a place for nobility. Garen approached the entrance and pressed a command into the panel. With a low hiss, the ship's ramp descended. He turned to her then, as if expecting hesitation. She did not hesitate. She climbed the ramp, her steps measured, her pulse steady. If this was to be her future, she would meet it without weakness. Inside, the ship was exactly as she expected. Functional, sterile, efficient. The walls were deep gunmetal gray, the lighting dim but practical. It smelled of steel, engine oil, and something sharper, disinfectant perhaps. The hum of machinery vibrated beneath her feet, the pulse of a living, moving thing. Garen led her through the corridors without a word. He did not glance back to see if she followed. He simply moved. She was grateful for the silence. Finally, he stopped at a small door and keyed in a command. It slid open with a soft mechanical whir, revealing a compact room. A single cot lined one wall, a storage compartment beside it, a small desk, a single chair, no decoration, no embellishments. "This is yours," Garen said. His voice was calm, unhurried. Lorana stepped inside, her golden eyes scanning every detail. The space was small, but hers. Garen lingered in the doorway. "You can lock the door from the inside," he said, nodding toward the control panel. "No one will enter without your permission." She turned to him sharply, studying his face. "A lock?" No one had ever given her a lock before. She had spent her life in places she could not escape, in rooms where others dictated when she entered and when she left. Why offer her this? Why give her a choice? What does he want? Garen held her gaze, reading her silence with the same patience he had shown since the moment they met. Then he simply said, "You don't trust me." Not a question, a fact. Lorana did not answer. He nodded as if her silence was enough. "Get some rest," he said. "We leave orbit in an hour." And then he turned and walked away. The door slid shut behind him, sealing her in. Lorana exhaled, slow and deliberate. Her fingers hovered over the control panel. She pressed the lock. A soft beep. A small red light flickered to life. Locked, secure. She took a step back and looked around the tiny space again. What now? Her entire life had been dictated by others. Her father's expectations, the noble's scorn, a future she had never been allowed to shape. Now she was on a human warship, heading into the unknown, with a man who had neither hurt her nor treated her like something fragile. "That doesn't mean I'm free." Her hand curled into a fist. "I didn't escape one cage just to be locked in another." Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. She would not be a prisoner. Not again. Lorana had never spoken a word. Not because she didn't want to, not because she was afraid, but because she had been born this way. Silence had been her first companion, her only constant woven into the very fabric of her existence. It wasn't a curse, nor was it a weakness. It simply was. And yet, for as long as she could remember, others had treated it as a defect, a flaw that tainted her noble bloodline. They spoke around her, over her, never to her. They assumed silence meant ignorance, that her inability to speak meant an inability to understand. Fools. She understood far more than they thought. Even now, sitting alone in the dim quarters of Garen Wool's ship, she could still hear the echoes of the noble's laughter, the whispers of contempt as her father handed her over like a discarded possession. But what lingered most was not the scorn in their voices. It was the way Garen had not laughed. She had expected mockery, expected indifference, expected to be treated as little more than an object. But instead he had given her something no one ever had. A choice. That was what unsettled her most. Lorana sat stiffly on the cot, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The ship hummed around her, the steady vibration beneath her feet a reminder that she was far from the cold marble halls of her father's estate. Here there were no silken drapes, no hovering chandeliers, no suffocating perfume of aristocracy, only metal and machinery, function over form. It was foreign, but not unpleasant. A soft chime from the door pulled her from her thoughts. She tensed, fingers twitching slightly. It was not an intrusion. The door was locked, and whoever stood on the other side had requested entry rather than forced it. A simple gesture, yet another reminder that Garen Wolf operated by rules she did not yet understand. Lorana pressed the panel, releasing the lock. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing Garen standing in the threshold. He was dressed as before, dark, practical clothing, no unnecessary ornamentation, a soldier's attire. But it was his expression that caught her attention. Calm, observant. He held something in his hands, a tray, carrying a sealed meal pack and a steaming cup. "You didn't eat," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Lorana simply looked at him. She had no way to deny or confirm his words, but he was right. She hadn't touched the rations provided in her room. It wasn't out of defiance, she simply hadn't thought to. Garen took a step inside, set the tray on the desk, then stepped back. No expectations, no demands. He didn't even motion for her to take it. He only spoke once more. "You should." And then he left. The door slid shut, leaving her alone once more. Lorana stared at the tray. She had expected something else. What? She wasn't sure. A demand, perhaps? Some attempt to assert control? A reminder that she was a reward, not a guest? That was how it had always been. That was how her father would have treated someone in her position. But Garen had simply left the food and walked away. Strange. The ship remained in transit, the low hum of its systems filling the silence as time stretched on. She did not attempt to explore, nor did she leave the confines of her quarters. She was not yet sure if she could, not because she was locked in, but because she did not know what to do with this unfamiliar freedom. When the next chime came, she was almost expecting it. Again a request. Again she pressed the panel. This time Garen entered carrying 2 steaming cups. The scent was bitter, sharp, curling through the air like something freshly ground. He placed one on the desk, then, without a word, sat in the only chair. He did not offer explanations, did not ask permission, but there was something about the way he moved, slow and deliberate, that made it clear he was not imposing. Lorana remained standing. Garen took a slow sip from his cup, then exhaled through his nose in something that was not quite a sigh. "You're not a prisoner." Lorana's gaze sharpened. His voice was level, steady. "I don't know what your father told you. I don't know what he expects from this or what you expect. But I'm not him." He motioned toward the cup he had placed for her. "Drink, if you want. Or don't." Lorana hesitated. It was a test. It had to be. Everything in her life had been a test. But he wasn't watching her like a predator waiting for a reaction. He simply sipped his drink, his posture as relaxed as if they had known each other for years, rather than mere hours. Lorana stepped forward and wrapped her hands around the cup. It was warm, the ceramic smooth beneath her fingers. "If this is a game, I do not know the rules." She lifted the cup to her lips and took a careful sip. The bitterness curled around her tongue, but the heat was grounding, steadying. Garen set his own cup down. I don't think I've ever met someone who says so much without speaking." A flicker of something passed through her chest, too quick to name. He leaned forward slightly. "I need to know how to communicate with you." She frowned slightly. "I don't expect you to speak," he clarified, "but I need to understand you." Lorana's fingers tightened around the cup. "Understand me? No one has ever tried." Garen seemed to read her hesitation. He lifted his hand and deliberately pointed at the cup. "This is drink." Lorana blinked. Then, before she could stop herself, her lips twitched, something dangerously close to amusement flickering across her face. Garen raised an eyebrow. "Not helpful?" She reached forward and tapped the cup once. He tilted his head. "All right." He tapped the cup as well. "Drink." She hesitated, then nodded slightly. He gave a small nod in return. "Good." That's a start. He then gestured toward her. You. Lorana narrowed her eyes slightly. He repeated the motion. You. Slowly she lifted a hand and touched her fingertips to her chest. Garen nodded. See? We're already making progress. He tapped his own chest. Garen. She stared at him. Then, after a long moment, she mimicked the motion. Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement, not triumph, something quieter. There, now we're talking. A strange warmth settled in her chest, unwelcome and unfamiliar. This man, this human, was doing something no one had ever done before. He was trying to understand her. Lorana wasn't sure if that made him dangerous, or something else entirely. The ship drifted through the void, its engines a steady hum beneath the metal floors. Outside, space stretched endless and silent, stars scattered like distant embers, too far away to offer warmth. Inside, the quiet was heavier, pressing in on Lorana from all sides. Not the suffocating silence of her father's court, nor the cold dismissal of the nobles who had laughed as she was given away. This was a different kind of quiet, one filled with expectation. Garen Wolfe was watching her. He wasn't staring exactly, but his gaze was steady, thoughtful, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't yet understand. She had seen that look before, but never directed at her. No one had ever bothered to try understanding her. She sat across from him in the ship's mess hall, a small, practical space designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The overhead lights cast a muted glow, making the cold metal seem softer than it was. A tray of untouched food rested between them, a mirror of the one he had left for her earlier. She hadn't eaten then. She wasn't sure if she would eat now. Garen took a slow sip from a metal cup, the warmth of the drink curling into the air between them. He didn't speak right away, didn't try to force conversation. And yet, somehow, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. Finally he exhaled, setting the cup down with a quiet clink. You know, he said, voice low and steady, I've worked with plenty of people who don't say much. Some because they prefer it that way, others because they don't have a choice. His eyes flickered to her, measuring her reaction. But you say everything without speaking at all. Lorana studied him, unreadable. She wasn't sure how to respond to that, if she should respond. She had no words to offer, only the language of movement, of stillness, of the small shifts in her posture that most overlooked. Garen leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. I've been trying to figure out how to communicate with you, he admitted. You understand me fine, but I don't want to rely on that alone. She raised a brow, tilting her head slightly. He smirked. Yeah, I caught that. You do that when you're curious. Lorana stilled. No one had ever pointed out the things she did, the small gestures, the shifts in her expression. She hadn't realized they were even noticeable. Garen took another sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of his cup. I need to know what works for you. How you can tell me what you need, what you want. What? She didn't react outwardly, but something in her chest tightened. She had never been allowed to want before. Lorana lowered her gaze to the tray in front of her, untouched food carefully arranged in small compartments. Is that what this is? A test? She reached out slowly, fingers grazing the edge of the tray, then hesitated. Garen didn't press her, didn't tell her to eat, didn't push the tray closer. He just waited. That more than anything made her decision for her. She picked up one of the nutrient bars, examining it carefully before taking a small, measured bite. The taste was bland but not unpleasant, functional, efficient. Like everything else on this ship. Garen nodded slightly, satisfied but not triumphant. See? That wasn't so hard. She narrowed her eyes at him, but he only smirked. I need to know if something's wrong, he continued, serious now. If you're hurt, if you need something. He tapped the table lightly. You need a way to tell me. Lorana considered that. She hadn't thought about it before, Hadn't needed to. No one had ever cared what she needed. She tapped a single finger against the metal tray. Garen's eyes flickered with something like amusement. All right. One tap means yes? She inclined her head slightly. He drummed his fingers against the table, thinking. 2 taps for no? A pause. Then she tapped twice. His smirk returned. See, we're already making progress. Lorana pressed her lips together, suppressing a reaction she didn't fully understand. This was new, strange. The idea that someone was trying to work with her rather than around her. She lifted her hand, then hesitated before tapping her fingertips lightly against the table. Garen's expression shifted, his eyes sharpening. He mirrored the motion, a single curious tap. That one's new, he murmured. She tapped again. Garen frowned slightly, considering. A question. Lorana nodded once. His gaze flickered with something unreadable before he nodded back. All right. I can work with that. Something in her chest uncoiled. Not relief, not exactly, but something close. The moment passed, and Garen stood stretching slightly. We'll be reaching the outer colonies soon, he said. I need to check the nav systems. He glanced at her once more. You're free to explore the ship if you want. You don't have to stay locked in here. Lorana's fingers twitched. Free? She had never been locked in, not physically, but stepping beyond the confines of these walls felt like something else entirely. Garen watched her a moment longer, then gave a small nod before heading toward the door. He paused just before stepping through, glancing back at her. You know, he said, for someone who doesn't speak, you're a lot louder than you think. And then he was gone. Lorana remained where she was, staring at the empty space where he had stood. She wasn't sure if she should be offended by that statement, or strangely pleased. Her fingers drummed once against the table, testing the feeling. The small, rhythmic sound filled the silence around her, not oppressive, not forced, just her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as silent as they all believed. Lorana had never let anyone touch her before. Not willingly, not without tensing, without waiting for some unspoken demand to follow. But now, as Garen carefully wrapped a bandage around her hand, she found herself still, watching him work. The cut wasn't deep, just a small slice across her palm from a loose piece of metal in the ship's engine room. A foolish mistake, one she wouldn't have made if she had been paying more attention. But she had been watching him, studying the way he moved, how his hands were steady, precise, as he repaired a damaged circuit. She had been distracted. And now Garen Wolfe was crouched in front of her, his fingers warm as they pressed the bandage into place. You need to be more careful, he muttered, securing the wrap. Ship engines aren't as forgiving as people. Lorana raised a brow. Who said people were forgiving? Garen smirked like he had heard the thought. All right, bad example. She exhaled through her nose, something dangerously close to amusement flickering across her face. And then the ship lurched violently. A metallic groan echoed through the walls as the floor tilted beneath them. Lorana's balance shifted, but before she could react, Garen caught her wrist, steadying her. The moment stretched. His grip was firm but not forceful, a reflex, a silent promise. I won't let you fall. Lorana swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the warmth of his fingers against her skin. She should pull away. She had always pulled away. But she didn't. She let him hold her just a second longer than necessary. And then the ship jolted again, harder this time, and an alarm blared through the speakers. Garen's expression hardened. He released her and was already moving. Stay here, he ordered, voice clipped as he grabbed his communicator. Tell me if... Lorana was already following him. Garen shot her a look, but didn't argue. They ran through the narrow corridors, boots pounding against metal. The ship shuddered around them. The hum of the engines strained. They reached the cockpit just as the proximity alarms screamed. "Shit," Garen muttered under his breath. Lirana didn't need to ask why. Through the wide viewport she saw them. 3 sleek ships, fast and heavily armed, cutting through the darkness of space like predators locking onto their prey. Pirates. Their ships bore no insignia, no official markings. Raiders, opportunists, the kind who didn't care who you were, only what you carried. And right now they were hunting Garen's ship. Garen dropped into the pilot's seat, fingers flying across the controls. They must think we're carrying something valuable. Lirana's fingers curled into fists. They think wrong. The comm crackled to life and a voice, low, rough, laced with arrogance, filled the cockpit. "Unidentified vessel, power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Garen let out a sharp breath, flicking a switch that cut the audio transmission off mid-threat. Yeah, that's not happening. Lirana slid into the co-pilot's seat, scanning the control panels. She had never flown, but she knew enough from watching her father's military briefings to recognize weapons systems and defensive measures. Garen's eyes flicked to her, sharp with assessed trust. "You want to help? Keep an eye on their movement. Tell me if they try to flank us." Lirana tapped the screen in front of her, analyzing the enemy's formation. They weren't attacking yet, testing, waiting, like a pack of wolves circling a wounded animal. She pointed at the leftmost ship, tapping the screen twice. Garen nodded. "Yeah, I see it. That one's trying to break off for a blindside approach." His hands moved over the controls, the ship jerking hard to the right, just as a blast of plasma fire grazed their hull. Too close. Too damn close. Lirana's breath came faster, her heart pounding against her ribs. The ship shook again as another blast rocked them from below. Sparks flew from one of the overhead panels, the scent of burning circuits filling the air. And then, sharp and sudden, Lirana gasped as something struck her side, a loose metal console thrown free by the impact. It slammed into her ribs, knocking her breath away. She crumpled forward, her vision blurring. Lirana. Garen was there before she could even process what had happened, one arm around her back, pulling her upright. His hands burned against her skin, pressing against the impact wound, checking for worse damage. Her head spun. Too much, too fast. "Stay with me." Garen's voice was lower now, edged with something almost like fear. "I need you to focus." Lirana's fingers clutched at his sleeve, breath shallow. The pressure in her chest tightened. Not just from the pain, but from something else, something raw and real and terrifying. She had never let anyone hold her before. Never let anyone be close. And yet here she was, gripping his sleeve like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. His hand pressed against the side of her face just for a second, brushing back a strand of silver-white hair that had fallen into her eyes. "We're gonna get through this. You hear me?" She nodded, but something in her chest ached. Something she didn't understand. And then, her eyes snapped to the viewport. A shape moved in the shadows, one of the pirate ships repositioning. Garen hadn't seen it. He was too focused on her. Lirana tried to warn him, tried to shout. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His heart was pounding. He tried again, his throat was on fire. The attacker went on the offensive. And then, Garen. The name ripped from his throat, raw and sharp, echoing in the narrow space. Garen turned, instantly parrying the knife just in time. His expression barely had time to change from surprise. He drew his gun and fired. The shot found its mark. The attacker collapsed, motionless. Silence. A heavy, weighted silence. Lirana froze, her own breath echoing loudly in her ears. Her chest rose and fell, her throat ached with the effort to say a single word. One impossible word. Garen turned to her slowly, his eyes wide with shock. "Lirana!" He took a step forward, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. You spoke." She swallowed. He tried to do it again, but no sound came out. His throat was irritated, his whole body trembling from the effort. But it didn't matter. He had done it. He had spoken. Garen's expression softened. When he spoke, his voice was calm, steady. "I heard you." And for the first time in his life, he believed it. The ship drifted through deep space, the wreckage of the pirate vessels floating lifelessly behind them. The battle was over. The immediate danger had passed. But Garen knew better than to relax just yet. Lorana was still standing near the viewport, her fingers absently brushing against her throat. She had spoken, a single word, but it had changed everything. He could see it in the way she held herself now, still cautious, still guarded, but no longer trapped. A soft beep echoed through the cockpit. Incoming transmission. Garen's jaw tightened. He flicked a switch, bringing up the comm screen. An incoming vessel. No pirate markings, no criminal signatures. This wasn't another threat. This was the law. A cold voice filtered through the speakers. "Unregistered vessel, this is Marshal Devron of the Outer Rim Authority. Your ship's distress signal was detected. You are within our jurisdiction. State your status." Garen muttered a curse under his breath. Of course. Lorana turned slightly, watching him. Garen hit the comm switch. "Marshal, this is Captain Garen Wolf. Situation is contained. Pirates attempted to board my ship unsuccessfully." A pause. Then the Marshal's voice again, sharper this time. "Wolf, you again." Lorana's eyes flickered with curiosity. The Marshal continued, tone unreadable. "We're reading multiple life signs aboard your ship. Stand by for inspection." Garen sighed heavily and ran a hand down his face. "Looks like we're getting company," he muttered, shooting Lorana a sideways glance. "Try to look innocent." She raised an eyebrow. A few minutes later, a sleek black and gold patrol vessel pulled up alongside them. The docking clamps engaged, and with a sharp metallic hiss, the airlocks connected. The doors slid open. Marshal Devran stepped onto the ship, flanked by two officers in dark, reinforced uniforms. He was tall, lean, and had the air of a man who had seen too much, but still hadn't lost his edge. A blaster rested at his hip, but his hands remained loose, relaxed. He wasn't looking for a fight. His sharp silver-gray eyes landed on Garen first. "You really don't know how to stay out of trouble, do you?" Garen crossed his arms. "Trouble seems to find me." Devran's gaze flicked to Lorana. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "And this one?" Lorana tensed. She felt Garen shift beside her, a subtle movement, but one that placed him between her and the Marshal. "She's with me," Garen said flatly. Devran's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't push. Instead, he glanced at the sealed cargo bay doors. "I assume that's where your pirates are?" "They're alive, most of them anyway," Garen replied. Devran exhaled sharply. "Guess I should be grateful for that." He nodded to his men. "Secure the prisoners." The officers moved past them, weapons drawn but unnecessary. The pirates had been defeated before they even knew what was happening. As Devran turned back to Garen, his gaze lingered once more on Lorana. She held herself still, unreadable, just as she always had. "You got a name?" the Marshal asked her. Lorana hesitated. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand to her throat. She parted her lips, tried to force the sound, but still, nothing came. The Marshal frowned slightly. His gaze flickered to Garen, as if expecting an explanation. "She doesn't talk," Garen said simply. Devran studied her a moment longer before finally nodding. "Fine." His tone was unreadable, but something about the way he looked at her said he wasn't convinced. Still, he didn't press. He pointed. "We'll take the pirates off your hands," Devran said, turning back to Garen. "But next time, try not to leave so much wreckage. Make space travel messy." "I'll do my best," Garen said dryly. The Marshal gave a final glance between them before stepping back toward the airlock. "Take care of yourself, Wolf, and watch your back." Then he was gone. The moment the airlock sealed behind them, Garen exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Well," he muttered, "that was fun." Lyrana remained silent, her mind still racing from the encounter. The marshal, the questions, the fact that for a brief second she had tried to speak again. She could still feel it, lingering at the edge of her mind, a voice waiting to be freed. Garen turned toward her. His voice was quieter now. "You okay?" She met his gaze. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand, pressed her fingers to her throat, then tapped once against the metal wall beside her. "Yes," Garen smirked. "Good." She turned away, stepping toward the viewport, staring out into the endless dark. The pirates were gone. The law had noticed them, and her voice was waiting. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to find it, because now she knew she could. Days passed. The ship drifted through space, the hum of the engines steady, a constant rhythm beneath their feet. The battle with the pirates was behind them. The Outer Rim Marshal had taken their prisoners, leaving Garen and Lyrana alone once more, surrounded by the vast and endless void. But something had changed. Lyrana felt it in the way Garen looked at her. Not with pity, not with expectation, but with something deeper, something that made her chest feel tight whenever their eyes met. And she felt it within herself. She had spoken. A single word. And though it had been ripped from her in desperation, forced out by sheer instinct, it had been real. It had been hers. She had spent her life believing she would never have a voice, that she would never be heard, but now she knew the truth. She could speak. She just had to fight for it. And so she tried. When she was alone in her quarters, she pressed her fingers to her throat, willing the sound to come. Some nights she barely managed a breath. Other nights she felt the vibration, the hint of a word trapped just beyond reach. But she kept trying. And Garen? He never asked, never pushed. But he knew. She caught him watching her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, a flicker of something in his eyes, not hope, not expectation, but patience. He was waiting for her. For the moment she was ready. And tonight she would be. The moment. Lyrana found him on the bridge, seated in the pilot's chair, boots propped lazily against the control panel as he stared out at the endless dark. His posture was relaxed, but she knew better. Garen Wolfe was never truly at ease. The weight of survival, of his past, always rested on his shoulders. She had never asked about it, just as he had never asked about hers, but she felt it, the way shadows lingered behind his eyes, the way he carried himself like a man who had spent too long in the depths of war. And yet, with her, he was different. She stepped closer. He heard her approach but didn't turn. Couldn't sleep? Lyrana hesitated. Then, slowly, she shook her head. Garen exhaled through his nose, a small, knowing sound. "Yeah, me neither." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she moved. It was small, just a step closer. But he noticed. She stood beside him now, her presence a quiet weight in the dim light of the bridge. He finally looked at her then, his gaze steady, waiting. Lyrana's pulse was hammering. She had fought battles with her own body, her own mind. But this would be the hardest fight of all. She swallowed. Her hand lifted, pressing gently to her throat. Garen sat up slowly, his boots dropping to the floor, his full attention now on her. She could see it. The moment realization settled into his features. He knew. He knew what she was about to do. Lyrana took a slow breath. Just one word. She had spoken before. She could do it again. Her lips parted, her voice raw, broken, the sound scraping out of her like something heavy being pulled from deep within. Garen didn't move. Didn't breathe. Lyrana's throat burned. her entire body trembling from the effort. But she wasn't stopping, not this time. She clenched her fists, forced air through her lungs, pushed. La. The word cracked, barely more than a whisper, but it was real. Garen's eyes widened, his breath hitched. Lorana gasped for air, her body shaking, her heart pounding so fast she could barely hear past it. One more word. She forced herself forward, breaking through the silence that had ruled her for a lifetime. Yep. The moments stretched into eternity. Then, Garen moved. Fast. Certain? His hands framed her face, rough and warm and real, pulling her toward him. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't hesitant, it wasn't soft. It was fierce, desperate, like he had been waiting for this moment as long as she had been waiting for her voice. Lorana melted into it, into him, into the warmth of his touch and the solid weight of his presence. She had never been touched this way, not in control, not with meaning. Her hands gripped his jacket, pulling him closer, grounding herself in this moment, in this feeling. When they finally pulled apart, Garen rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven, his hand still holding her like he was afraid to let go. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Say it again. Lorana's chest tightened. She opened her mouth, tried. Nothing. Her throat burned, the words trapped once more. Not yet. But Garen only smiled. He lifted a hand, brushing his thumb gently over her lips. It's okay. His voice was low, steady. You don't have to. He leaned in, pressing a final, lingering kiss against her forehead. I heard you. Lorana closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. She had said it, and he knew. That was enough. But one day, she would say again. And this time she wouldn't stop.